Hey everyone, and welcome to yet another episode of the Boost Your Biology podcast. I'm your host, Lucas, and today joining me is a friend of mine from Melbourne as well. Her name's Holly Sinclair. And we're here to talk about all things health, mostly focusing on women's health in particular. And obviously I'll chime in and put my two bobs worth in every now and then. But yeah, thanks for joining me today, Holly.
It's my pleasure. It's my, for those of you who don't know, Lucas and I are allied when it comes to swapping out the men to the women clients. So I call him the sperm man.
For those wondering why, that's in reference to my, encouragement of icing the gonads for the guys listening.
I always tell my female clients who are trying to conceive, listen, you need to send your bloke to go see Lucas because this is a 50-50 job, sister.
Yeah. So do you want to tell my audience a little bit about you, your journey, maybe a little bit about how you got to where you are today?
Yeah. I mean, I'll keep it brief because I know we've got a lot to go through today from an educational perspective. But I'm obviously specializing in women's health now, but that's been the end byproduct of a 15-year career in health and fitness. So these things certainly don't happen overnight, as you and I both know. And I think I ended up specializing with women, and specifically like young women in the bracket of 25 to 35-year-olds. One, because that's my age bracket, but also, my own personal experience of having PCOS myself, having amenorrhea, having an eating disorder, having mental health issues, having addiction problems myself. It just made the most sense for me to then obviously try and help those who are in similar circumstances. Because I just think, and I know we're going to get into this today, but I just think that what the healthcare system provides is a load of shit. Like, that's just my blunt opinion. And that's through both my personal and now professional experience, working with people that are going through a lot of these really, I like to call them like we don't knows, the we don't know problems, of things like polycystic ovarian syndrome or loss of cycle, amenorrhea, or, irritable bowel syndrome or chronic fatigue syndrome, or, and a good tutor of mine, or mentor of mine, said anything that ends in a syndrome just basically means they don't know. And I 100% agree with that. So now I've just sort of ended up specializing and working with people with the I don't knows, and really getting some good results with a lot of women that I work with now, because it's all about transitioning them into a healthier and more sustainable lifestyle effectively. And we'll get into that today, but that doesn't just mean nutrition. And I think this is where the wellness industry goes wrong, right? Because the wellness industry is all about monotherapies. It's like, got to be vegan, got to be carnivore, got to do intermittent fasting, got to do this, got to do that. And it's like, well, those mononutritions are great, but they're not great long-term. And it's about understanding when to use certain modalities, nutritionally specifically, but then also adding in things like spirituality or training capacities or physiological support with things like chiropractic and physiotherapy and fascial release. And so my point is, like, when you're working with a person who has one of those I don't know diagnoses, yes, it's important to support them from a nutritional standpoint, but it's also important to understand all the other aspects of healing. And that's, I guess, where I differ, I would say, from other coaches.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's funny how we label healthcare as healthcare when really it's sick care, isn't it? Ultimately?
Yeah. 100%, man. And it's super frustrating because everything that both yourself and myself and our colleagues put out there, it's never to like demoralize somebody who's going through that, let's just call it the sick care system, right? But it's more about like offering them a different perspective, and also, and like, I think I had this conversation with a mentee of mine the other day. I think that at the real issue of it is that what we suggest is personal responsibility. And in a victim-based society, that doesn't really sit well with a lot of people, because the current model of healthcare, sick care, is you don't have to take responsibility for your health. You just take this pill, and if it doesn't work, come back, and then maybe we'll cut something out of you. And if that doesn't work, well, maybe we'll give you another pill. But it's like, well, hold up. Why don't you just like take a breath and think about what are some things that you can do to ensure that your health is improving? And that's where I guess like there's a little bit of contention from, well, certainly like I get a lot of criticism for what I do. I don't know about you with trolls and stuff, but yeah, I mean, it's not my intention to demoralize people. It's just I want to awaken them to what is possible, because I've experienced it.
Yeah.
I went through the system, you know, and it didn't fucking work, right? It only actually made me worse. And through the support of people around me, I was able to sort of start navigating a different road to go down. And here I am now, like fucking thriving at 31.
Yeah, it's funny. Obviously, like I can relate to that as well. Like the system sort of failed me, and I guess the real reason is because, like sick care, where they completely depart the fact that prevention is the ultimate medicine, right? Because obviously,
Yeah.
with the way that they go about treating patients right now, obviously it's very reductionist and very symptom based and suppress the symptoms. Whereas what we do in this whole wellness space is that we're trying to really support people with their prevention strategies and just to increase overall wellness to mitigate these diseases. So yeah, I guess that's one thing that we love to do. We love to share information and empower people to
Yeah.
take control of their health and beyond just
It's
nutrition as well.
for sure, right? It's super bizarre though, because when you really like look at it at a simplistic level, 80% of chronic diseases, it might even be more now, but 80% are metabolic.
Yeah.
Like, so like you just look at that and you go, well, if it's metabolic, then surely if I intervene with what I'm putting into my body, that's going to improve my chances of not experiencing a chronic disease. But that's like too simple for people to understand, and I think I was actually thinking about this last night. I don't know why. I think about some weird shit in my spare time. But I was thinking about like, when you see, especially through social media now, right, that a lot of these Western practitioners, and mind you, I've got a lot of colleagues who are Western practitioners. I love them. I think they're super beneficial, right? But there are some outliers who really hate people like you and I. Like they hate us, yeah? And they are the ones that always put out these really like nasty social media posts. One that comes to mind is a heart surgeon put up a Instagram post saying the only benefit to Mark Hyman's books would be to wipe your ass with it. And I'm just like, and what's ironic is that from what I know, the people I look up to, like the Mark Hymans, like the Dadas Karazians, like the Tom O'Briens, they don't post stuff like that. They're just out there trying to, as you said, empower and educate. So you really start to see, like, I think what I'm trying to get to is like they're super threatened as well, because like through prevention is a lack of need for them. And they don't know how to handle it. And our friend Olivia Orkowski, she makes a good point, and she said this to me months ago. For a very long time, doctors have always been the smartest people in the room, but now they're not. And they don't know how to handle that anymore, right? When, to be honest, Holly, who's technically only a PT, comes in and actually knows more about gut health than you do, well, they get super threatened and they start to make these really nasty comments. So I think if you're an audience member of ours and you see some of that stuff, just think to yourself, is that actually empowering and educating somebody, or is this just like a pissing contest? Because if it comes across like that, they probably aren't the best person for your health journey.
Definitely.
Anyway, I can get on tangents.
Oh no,
Let's shift gears, shall we?
I mean, you're very real, and I guess like there'll be people listening in who'll be 100% aligning with what you just said, and you know the whole ego gets involved, particularly with these Western, you know, or traditional doctors, things like that. It gets a bit of a, you know, there is a lot of tension because really, if we, like you said, empower people with the tools and, you know, the supplements and nutrition and the other lifestyle strategies to really optimize their overall health, and, you know, their need for the medications and their treatment is going to be reduced. So obviously there's, having said that though, I really think there are more and more Western doctors that are coming on board, that are supportive of what we do. And so, I don't know, what do you feel like how do you see the future? Like, how do you see things progressing like in the next maybe like 5 to 10 years?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, like I just said, I have a lot of Western medicine practitioners that I work with. I actually couldn't do what I do if I didn't have them in my corner, right? Because they obviously provide things like blood scripts, and a lot of my testing goes through one GP in particular because he really appreciates the preventative side of things. But with saying that and knowing that there are some, you know, really progressive practitioners out there, I still think it's so minimal. Like, I really do. And as you know, there's that famous research paper which shows that the average piece of scientific literature takes 17 years to become normal and to hit our GP's desks. So even the literature that's being taught right now in medical schools, and that's a whole nother conversation, because considering what's happened this year with the pandemic, a lot of these students aren't in hospitals like they should be, and they're not in doctors' surgeries like they should be, learning as part of their degree. So now the next wave of medical professionals are really going to be on the back foot because they haven't been given that same opportunity to be on the front line as part of their degree due to this pandemic, which is pretty fucked up when you think about it. But so the literature being taught right now is still not going to be the norm for another 17 years. You know, and like you would definitely, I would presume you would have a much more articulate way of explaining this from a research perspective. But there's over like 28 million research papers on PubMed, 28 million. So, and the reality is no one is going to have a grasp across all of those papers, right? So how many, except for Lucas, but like how much information is actually being missed, right? Because often that's the argument. Oh, there's no research for what you're saying. Well, yes, there is. There's plenty of research, but it just gets missed in the process. So I don't really think much is going to change over the next 5 to 7 years, unfortunately. I actually think due to this year and the strain on the public healthcare system and, you know, that really fear-invoking narrative that's come across, I think it's going to get worse, to be honest, because people are still very mainstream, you know, and that's across the board. That's healthcare, media, politics, people are still very, very mainstream in their thinking and processing. So that's my opinion.
Yeah, I think at least one positive thing will definitely come out of this whole pandemic. And like, obviously it's up to us to really vocalize this, but that's like to really understand that, things as simple as like your vitamin D status and like your metabolic flexibility, your ability to, your glucose tolerance, things like that. These are paramount to maintaining good health. And now we're seeing links to that and the virus and worse disease outcome in those that have low vitamin D, things like that. But I want to segue onto something else. You sort of touched on, blood testing and things like that. And we can sort of go down a bit of a rabbit hole in regards to the reference ranges for certain blood tests, and like how we the most common response that we get from people that we work with is that, my doctor said my results are fine. Like they're in the normal range. It was fine. My TSH was 1.5.
0.5.
Yeah, it was something ridiculous. So obviously, like, I mean, do you think that's probably going to be difficult for the like Western system to change? But do you feel like there's more and more people talking about the fact that there are these optimal ranges and things like that?
Yeah. I don't think there's more people talking about optimal ranges. I think the issue is that those medical ranges are determined based off a bell curve and a bell curve of our society, right? So when I started doing bloods 7 years ago now, for example, fasting insulin, the medical range was 0 to 15. Well, now it's 0 to 22.
That high.
So
it goes up to 22.
Yeah. So that medical range has increased over the last 7 years since I've been doing this. And that's just one example of many markers, but that's because the average of society is getting metabolically worse and worse and worse. And so the way in which they gather those ranges, they have to accommodate for that average, right? And for me, like, I just look at that and I think, far out, man, because, for anyone listening, the optimal range is under 5, okay? And if you're over 10.5, you have insulin resistance.
Yep.
So if we look at that and we think, okay, well, someone goes to their doctor and their fasting insulin is now 20, their doctor's going to say, oh, you're fine. It's like, no, this dude has serious type 2 diabetes, which is probably playing into a host of health issues, particularly like neurological symptoms, right? And metabolic markers.
And the thing is with that, if it's that high, that can be elevated before their glucose changes. That's the other thing.
Correct.
They don't even acknowledge that.
Correct.
So it could look all normal, but
exactly. And most standard blood tests are not going to test fasting insulin either. And so this is the other thing, right? So, it's pretty concerning when it comes to the blood side of things. I mean, I've got a client today who I'm going through her blood work with her, and she, her vitamin D is -10.
How could it be negative?
Oh, sorry, under 10. Okay. Right? Like, they didn't even get a reading for it. It's so low.
Jeez.
Right? So, and her doctor said her bloods were fine.
So bad.
And I'm just like, what the fuck? Like, sometimes I feel like I'm living in the twilight zone.
Yeah.
Right? But, and she also has EBV. Her doctor said her bloods were fine. Right? So I'm like, what the hell is going on? Right? But yeah, I mean, the answer here is either training up the medical community a little bit better, or, which I don't think is going to happen, unfortunately, because, they're looking for a disease. And why are they looking for a disease? Because that requires then some form of pharmaceutical intervention.
Yep.
And I know for a fact that in Australia, right, this isn't an American thing. The doctor that I use and I've used other doctors as well to help me with getting bloods, he gets taken out for 2 free lunches every week by pharmaceutical reps. So this is happening in Australia. It's not just an American thing, where pharmaceutical companies literally buy doctors. So, like, you know, we've got to think about where the agenda is when it comes to some of these test reports. But that's why, to be fair, like, I'm really starting to steer away from blood panels, just because also, like, with my clients, if they can't access my GP, the feedback I get from them trying to get blood panels done, like, it's traumatic for some of them.
Traumatic.
You know? Yeah, because they'll go into a doctor's office with my blood script and the doctor will just be like, these are unnecessary, you're fine, like, who is this person? Like, you know, like, it's crazy out there, because it comes back to that ego issue, right? Like, you know, I specialize with women with things like amenorrhea and PCOS and endometriosis, and most of the time they can't even get their sex hormones tested.
That's ridiculous.
Right?
That's like,
so for me, I'm starting to shift away from having to rely on the system, and I use pathology centers where the patient can actually order it directly.
Yeah.
So like Nutripath in Victoria is one of those places, and they do everything but blood testing. So they do stool testing and salivary testing and urine testing and genetic testing, and that's still going to give me enough data to be able to support that client without the blood panel. But yeah, I don't know if that answered your question.
I want to obviously I want to delve deeper into like PCOS, amenorrhea, dysmenorrhea, what's considered normal.
Yeah.
Let's say women of the age between maybe like 18 to like 30, you know, how common is like a period issues and like menstruation issues?
Well, one research paper, this is relevant to the contraceptive pill, but it showed that 58% of users were using the contraceptive pill for non-contraceptive reasons, right? So, yeah, so for things like period pain, amenorrhea, polycystic ovarian syndrome, endometriosis, pain management. So if we take that data, we're probably looking at 58%, right? We're probably saying there's quite a lot of girls dealing with a lot of reproductive health issues. And, you know, I tend to attract clients who have just transitioned off contraception and are now looking for some support around those reproductive health issues. Or, you know, I don't really attract clients who are quite stoic in staying on contraception, I guess is my point, right? But even after the fact of coming off a lot of those Band-Aid fixes, you've actually made the problem worse by that point, because you've exacerbated inflammatory markers, you've stopped ovulation from happening, so you've lost all of those really beneficial sex hormones, especially during those really formative years, right? Like when you're looking at a woman from 18, her ovaries are still quite formative, her brain is quite formative. So a lot of those pharmaceutical interventions can, unfortunately, long term, make a lot of these problems worse. So it's really common. It's really common for people to go through PCOS and amenorrhea. I mean, I had amenorrhea for 3 years.
And in your case, that was due to some pretty extreme like dieting and training and things like that.
Yeah. And, you know, so for me, like I was vegan at the time. I was incredibly under eating, and I was obsessively running, like cardio bunny. And, you know, I went through the healthcare system. I got sent to a specialist. They checked my ovaries, and then they told me at the age of 18 that I had to remove one of my ovaries because there was so many, there was so many cysts on it. And I'm fortunate that my mum is quite alternative, and she was like, hell no, this is not going to happen, right? But, you know, when I reflect back on that moment and you get told that you're infertile and you're never going to have children and you're going to have to rely on the pill for the rest of your life, like, it's pretty demoralizing. But yeah, these things are really common. And I think like one of the biggest concerns that I have is when a client starts with me and they say, oh, I got diagnosed with PCOS.
Yep.
My first question is what type? And they never know. They never know what type of PCOS they have. Right?
So who's giving their regular GP?
Yeah, GP.
So they've just said you've got PCOS, and then what?
Well, then it's like, well, I mean, I just had a client start with me this week who's, this is a great story. This is the type of story I always get. She got her full blood panel done, went to see the GP. She's got cystic acne and amenorrhea. GP said, based off your symptoms, and she's got very high fasting insulin, based off your symptoms and your insulin, I think you've got PCOS. So the option is the pill. And this client said, I don't want to go on the pill. So what other options are there for me? And also, this client said, why is that? What's that DHEA marker on my bloods? Because it was really high. Yeah. And the doctor says, oh, I don't know what that means. Hang on, let me just Google it.
No way.
Googled it in front of her and said, oh yeah, this makes sense. That's probably why you've got cystic acne, because it's an androgen.
Wow.
What? And at that point, this client said into herself, okay, I'm going to find somebody else to work with, right? But that's a really, yeah, I mean, that's usually the scenario. The GP is doing the diagnostic and they might get sent off for an ultrasound, but we know now that using just an ultrasound for you can't use that as a diagnostic tool anymore. So in order to have a proper diagnosis of PCOS, you have to have elevated testosterone, elevated fasting insulin, ultrasound, and a 45-day plus cycle. So you have to technically have amenorrhea. And that always gets forgotten as well.
And ovulation as well. Like they're not ovulating. Is that right as well?
They could be, but it might be incredibly delayed ovulation. So if they're getting like a 45 to 50-day cycle, and this is the other thing as well, like we would have to like be charting them and really looking at some of those biofeedback markers to assess if they were ovulating, using things like blood markers like FSH and LH ratios, to determine, and if there's any progesterone present, right? But it's all just dependent on the individual. But that's usually the 4 things that you need for a PCOS diagnosis, which, you know, it's very rare that those 4 things get met.
Yeah. So then obviously some women would have like maybe 1 of 4, 2 of 4. And then obviously the treatment protocol would differ.
Yes.
As in like you'd need to structure that. But what do the GPs currently do in terms of
just the pill?
So where's the
pill or metformin?
So one of those 2. Okay.
Usually both.
So okay.
Yeah. And like the irony, I mean, I know you're the pharmaceutical dude, so you could probably actually add far more information than me on this, but you know, the irony with metformin is it fucks your E. coli. Okay, so it really impacts the E. coli in your colon. And E. coli is necessary for B7 absorption. And B7 helps us to tolerate glucose.
Yep.
So,
actually, like, we're talking about biotin.
Yeah, sorry, biotin. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually recently read a paper on very, very high dose biotin reversing type 1 diabetes.
There you go.
I know they were using massive doses, but and I've actually experimented with biotin really high dose before bed.
Yeah,
that was not a good idea because because it drops the sugars so rapidly, you get nightmares because it's you get hypoglycemia throughout the night.
Interesting. Yeah, but so you know, you start to think, well, if we know that, right? Why aren't we just suggesting that these people supplement with a B complex?
That sort of information, like to acquire that sort of knowledge, you know, I'm in these underground forums where like you need like ridiculous codes to enter into, like to find underground studies. That's what like and even with like other vitamins and things like that, there's so much like information that's just not put forward. And that's a great example.
Yeah, I mean, there's this great book that got written over a decade ago called Drug Muggers. I don't know if you've heard of it, by a woman called Susie Cohen. She's a pharmacist. And she basically, this whole book is like, here's the medication, here's what it depletes.
Ah, cool. Oh, that's cool.
It's phenomenal.
What's that called? Drug Muggers?
Drug Muggers. So that's something that I, have used for over a decade now, and it's still very relevant today. And then you just start to see, I mean, we're going a bit off track here from PCOS, but you start to see like, okay, so someone's using the birth control pill to manage this syndrome, which, to be honest, and this is going to be very controversial, but I think majority of people with the PCOS syndrome, it's all bullshit. Like, that's my honest feedback. It's because they're unhealthy. You're unhealthy, and you're unhealthy.
But they may look healthy.
They may look from a lean perspective, right? So, okay, so you might be lean.
Okay.
But, you're dealing with chronic inflammation, you're dealing with gut permeability, you're dealing with, super inflammatory food groups. And this has just unfortunately created a host of symptoms, which we now call polycystic ovarian syndrome. And yes, that might lead to the formation of cysts. But just a side note, Lara Bryden is the queen when it comes to this information, but everyone has cysts.
Not me.
So because basically what they're referring to is follicles. And the whole issue with using an ultrasound as a diagnostic, especially when you're young, you can one cycle have quite a lot present on your ovaries, but then the next cycle you might not have that many present. And so if you decide to go in and get an ultrasound on the fortunate month that you have a lot present on your ovaries, well, then you'll get a diagnosis of PCOS, right? So
why are these forming in the first place? Why are they even present?
So there's a couple of school of thoughts. There is the whole androgen dominant conversation, and that's exacerbated by an excess amount of insulin in the blood. So the biochemical reaction is insulin sort of triggers that androgen dominance, and then you start to get that cyst formation. But then also, if you actually just look at the processing of calcification, right? Cortisol, when in excess, increases calcification. Okay, so that's why, and this is like a little bit of a tangent, but if we look at a cyst, that's a form of calcification. If we look at people with really poor biomechanic movements, like stiff joints, that's calcification issues, right? If you look at issues like bone density, that's a calcification problem. If you're looking at low vitamin D, that's a calcification problem. But that can all be exacerbated by high cortisol.
Right.
So, maybe the issue is you're stressed.
Yep.
And why are you stressed? Well, because maybe life is tough, right? So that's definitely, especially at the moment, right? 2020 is fucked up. But you could be stressed because you're eating gluten and you have an underlying gluten intolerance that you're not aware of, because the way that it actually presents in your body is through your cerebellum, through your ability to actually have good cognitive function. And because that's not digestive, you go, oh, well, I'm fine with gluten. Meanwhile, you're fucking bumping into walls and you can't remember what word to say, and right? So, and that's a stressor. That's one stressor. One. So then you've got alcohol, sugar, dairy, medications, toxic load, products that you put on your skin, lack of sleep, undereating. Undereating is a huge stressor, right? And how many women undereat? Like, we all do it, right? And, I've got this theory that that's why, you see far more problems of the thyroid in women than you do in men. Because we fucking constantly undereat.
And which food group in particular? Like, which?
Oh, meat.
Yeah. And
we just don't eat enough meat or fats.
Yeah.
So, especially things like, when we look at the thyroid, let's go on another tangent. We look at the thyroid, you need iodine, selenium, vitamin D, zinc, chromium. Where are you going to get tyrosine? Where are you going to get these things from? You're going to get them from really good quality animal proteins, seafoods, lots of good quality fats. But then to get those things to your thyroid, you have to have a properly functioning gut. Now, why would your gut not be functioning? Because maybe you've got stress issues, and stress lowers your immune system, and 70% of the immune system's in the gut lining, right? So now all of a sudden the gut becomes super vulnerable to hyperpermeability, to bacterial infections, to parasitic infections, and that then blocks your ability to absorb. So you could be eating paleo, but you're still not getting results because you actually haven't done further investigation to what's going on within the gut lining. Right. And like, this is why testing is beneficial. So my whole process with a client is, let's start with the foundations. Let's start with food, sleep, water. That's it. And movement, right? Because that gets super neglected, even in the Eastern world. Like, I know you're sort of in your final year of naturopathy, but a lot of my experience with people going through those types of clinics is it's an array of supplementation, but it's never like reverse dieting them straight off the bat, right? So, and I'm a big pro supplement taker, yeah? But my point is, like, we have to start with the foundations, and then after 2 to 3 months, if you're not improving, then we need to further investigate. Then we need to rely on that added supplement support.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
I agree.
So yeah, you can see it's all interconnected.
Yeah.
But when you go into a GP's office, they've got 5 minutes. So to be fair to them, they are at the mercy of the system as well.
Yeah, it's not their. It really isn't. It's not their fault.
It's not, right? And we have created this narrative that when you go in there, you expect a result walking out.
Okay. Yeah.
True. So you go to the doctor, and that doctor is expected to fix you within 5 minutes. So what are they going to do? They're going to use things that provide some form of a solution. Immediate, right?
What are the consequences of that? The immediate. That's the whole point, right? That immediate suppression will cause dysfunction somewhere else, and then let's find some solution to the other problem that's just arisen.
Yeah, it's so wild, man. And you know, and I used to say this when I worked in the fitness industry. I used to say this to my trainers that I managed all the time. We actually have more power than any other healthcare professional, a personal trainer. You know why? More power to influence. You know why? Because we are the only industry that sees you every week. We see you every week for a session, right? So how much power do you have to influence? Huge.
Yeah.
How often does someone see their GP? Like once a quarter? Maybe 2 to 3 months? Yeah. I mean, personally, I haven't gone through the healthcare system in 12 years. So, but I would imagine that the normal is maybe 3 to 4 months. You would see your GP for something. And that's for 5 to 7 minutes, right? So the power to influence is huge from a personal training perspective. And I really do think that gets overlooked. And that's why it's so important when you're working within this health and wellness industry, whether it be as a lifestyle coach, as a personal trainer, as a health coach, or whatever. It's up to you to upskill, and it's up to you to self-teach and really get some good knowledge, base knowledge around preventative health measures, because you can really transform somebody's life. And I think that gets, super overshadowed.
Yeah, for sure. What about the whole premise on staying within your scope of practice? I find that's probably one of the hardest things. Knowing when to refer, because that's a challenge, and I'm sure you've seen it with clients.
Yeah.
And at what point do you need to,
Yeah, I think to that point, I think that's why it's so important to leave your ego at the door and actually create a really good collaborative community of like-minded health professionals.
Yep.
And that's one thing I've done. I feel like I've done quite well.
Seeing you do that. Yeah. I've seen
And like, you know, I refer people to you. I refer people to Lauren Curtin, who's my TCM girlfriend.
Yeah.
I refer people to Jessie, who does the charting. Like, I know where my limitations are, right? But, and this probably goes against the whole not being egoic, but for me personally and professionally, I can't use pharmaceuticals, right? My personal and professional opinion is they're unnecessary in the context of supporting somebody's long-term health journey, not in the context of acute support. Yeah. Let's just make that disclaimer.
Give us an example.
Like if I'm in a car accident and my fucking leg comes off, give me the antibiotics. Yeah. Give me the morphine, right? But when I'm talking about like working with a client long-term, I can't use pharmaceuticals. So I need to figure out another way using the body, using the resources that the earth has provided us. I need to figure that out, right? And so there is a point where I don't really ever suggest to people to like go find a really good doctor that we can work alongside. To be fair, I actually don't, because there is a part of me where I do feel like there can be too many chefs in the kitchen.
Yeah.
And if I get to that point where I can't help that person anymore, I actually just move them on from working with me, which I've done with clients, right? But I tend to not work coincidingly with practitioners. It's just too much noise, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the client gets confused. And this happens quite a lot, like when they're seeing a naturopath and they're seeing a Chinese doctor and they're seeing me for coaching and they're seeing a personal trainer. And I'm like...
There's too many.
It's too much.
Yeah.
You know? So you just have to, I think as the client, you have to be ready to just commit to one thing, see it through. If it doesn't work for you, that's okay. But then you transition on to the next person, as opposed to trying to like see every Bob, Jane, Dick and Harry.
Yeah. So obviously, you know, you want to encourage people to make like minimal changes, maybe like 1 to 2 things they focus on per, maybe like for the next 2 weeks.
Yep.
But obviously, like for some people, you know, there's some people that want a lot all at once, whereas other people, they want just like, you know, they need baby steps. They need like to be taught and told exactly what to do. So what do you find, like to get the best results? Yeah. What works best? What have you seen work best?
The people who are like, start with me and they're like, yep, I'm going to do everything. I'm going to do the food guidelines. I'm going to, you know, I'm going to start training every day. I'm going to do my journaling, like, they are going to be a disaster.
They're the ones that, it's interesting. Yeah. The ones that
because they're so low dopamine that they're like bulls out of the gate, and then they'll literally just drop off. They'll hit 3 or 4 weeks and their dopamine is so low that they'll find the next thing, and then they'll find the next thing and the next thing. So I actually love clients who are challenging from the day dot, because I know that as long as they're showing up, I'm going to get them there. Yeah. Right? As long as you're showing up for our calls, slow and steady wins the race. But I get mostly nervous with those really enthusiastic clients, because I just know their neurochemistry is not working in their favor at that point. And I think with those people, what I always do is I actually don't allow them to do everything at once. You know, it's like holding them back on the lead almost, because it's really important to get their neurochemistry to a point where they're a lot more settled. And, you know, and you can sense it, you know, like when you're talking to a client and they're just like verbally diarrheaing to you, you're like, yo, woosa,
Yeah.
okay, take a breath, you know, because it's like they're so head dominant that they're having like out of body experience at that point. Like they're not grounded at all. So it's just about being an established coach and knowing when to identify those clients and saying, you know what, I'm only going to give you one thing. And then those same clients will text me 3 days later. Oh, have you heard about this supplement? Oh, what about this supplement? Should I try this? Should I add this in? No. Stick to the guidelines.
Yeah.
You know, like I had one client start with me recently. She took a fat burner. She's super type A. She took a fat burner for breakfast. I said, that's got to go. And then I get a message 2 days later. Can I have a Barocca instead? No.
Yeah.
You know, like it's just about being able to be stoic with those clients and just say, calm your farm a little bit.
Yeah. I want to sort of segue onto some other big mistakes that you see people make, like just when they're trying to heal, or like maybe some what about like mindset and limiting beliefs and things like that? Like, what do you think?
It's huge, man.
Yeah.
It's huge. Like I had my brother actually asked me last night, what's my drop-off rate with clients? And I actually have a really good retention. I think I've only ever, since I started the business, I think 3 people have finished up working with me, 2 of which was because I moved them on to other practitioners.
Wow.
Right. So I think there's only 1 client who finished up early with me. And I use her as an example because she had really bad constipation, like horrendous. And she did, to her credit, she did the gut protocols. She did the nutrition guidelines, and we got to about 4 months and it just wasn't improving. And, you know, she had diantomyoba, which is a parasite in the colon, which causes a lot of constipation. So, you know, that was good for me to reiterate to her, like, it's a gut issue, like, let's keep going, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, she did all of that, got to 4 months, and then I could sense that she was getting frustrated. And I got a text message from her just saying, I want to wrap things up. Like, I haven't got any results. Now, she never, ever got vulnerable with me. Ever. Like, she never, ever, ever dropped her guard. Everything was structured and systematic. And yeah, I feel fine. Yeah, I feel fine. Yeah, I feel fine. Yeah. And I was always trying to chip away at that layer with her, but I just couldn't penetrate it, right? Which is, I feel like I'm pretty good at that now. Like, I've been in the game long enough to be able to get to that point with someone, but she was tough. And I use her as an example because literally constipation is the spiritual definition of holding on, right? So, you know, yes, you've done all of the tangible things like gut protocols and nutritional guidelines and that sort of stuff. And we even did like some like pelvic floor exercises, all of that sort of stuff.
Right.
But I just know it was brain for her. Like it was, and I'm sure you see this a lot, but I really do feel like those types of clients, they're so subconsciously attached to the health problem. It's their identity.
Yes.
Right. And so even though they are consciously seeking help for it, they subconsciously are super attached to it. Because when a health issue is your identity, you are a victim to that health problem. And so every single relationship in your life is based off you being a victim to that health problem. So why would you change that? Like if it's still serving you from a victim perspective, whether that be people care for you, people pay you more attention, you know, you've got the problem, you know, all of those sorts of things. Well, why would you actually fix it? You know, so, and I think that's pretty controversial to make a statement like that, but I do think it's actually a big issue for a lot of people, is their identification with the problem. You know, I had a client years ago who had POTS, which is an autoimmune disorder where you just faint. And she had a lot of mental health issues. She actually was my first transgender client. She transitioned into, or was at the time transitioning into a man. So she had her breasts removed. She was starting hormone replacement therapy, lots and lots of mental health issues. She was in a same-sex relationship, but she'd birthed both of their daughters through IVF, and there was so much shit going on, right? And she just wouldn't, she would do the nutrition and then she would stop, because she was so attached to being that victim. Like she was South African as well, so she was dark-skinned. So everything was about being this minority. Everything was about being this victim. Like, I'm a Black gay woman, I'm transitioning, like I've got mental health issues. And she was my most challenging client I've ever worked with, because it's like when you stay attached to that victim state, you're not going to get better. It's just not going to happen. And that's why people love the system. That client, for example, loved the system, always went to her specialist. You know why? Because they fucking perpetuate the victim story, right? It's like, oh yeah, it's not your fault, take this medication. What?
But people like to be in that state though, right? They don't actually want to heal. It's self-sabotage, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
It's a weird,
and you know, it's weird, man. It's so
weird.
weird. And like, you know, I had a conversation with a client of mine yesterday who's great. She's a fantastic girl and she's a great client, and she's got some mental health issues. And she was expressing to me that she was super frustrated at herself because she couldn't commit to the food. And I said to her that, and I think this is really relevant for a lot of people, that when you're in a stressed state and you're in a state of chaos, whether that be your health or your relationships or your work or whatever it is, right? Whatever the state of disease it is,
yeah,
even though you're not enjoying it, yeah, it's familiar.
it's the norm.
So when something is familiar, that means it's comfortable because you understand it. So even though you're not feeling good, and even though you're not enjoying your life in a weird fucking sadistic way, you keep doing it because you understand it. It's a familiar state. And in order to move away from that state, you have to get uncomfortable.
Yep.
And why the fuck would anyone want to get uncomfortable? That is literally like saying to our ego, peace, I'm out. Right?
Yeah.
So, and I think that's really where the point of contention and frustration comes for a lot of people, because yeah, they subconsciously love the state that they're in. And when Holly or Lucas or whoever comes in and says, well, you need to do this, you need to get uncomfortable, they rebel. They're like, hell no, I'm not doing that. And you start to recognize good coaches when they are the ones that transition you through that process. Yes, it's going to hurt. Yes, it's going to be fucking disgusting. You're going to cry a lot. You're not going to enjoy how you're feeling. You're probably going to get a lot of die-off symptoms, yeah? But if you commit to it, you will feel so good at the end that it'll all be worth it. But it's just... What was that?
Short-term pain, long-term gain.
That's it. That's it. That's it. You got to do the work, right? But that comes back to our original point when we were talking about the healthcare system. It's personal responsibility, right?
Accountability, extreme ownership. Jocko Willink.
That's it. That's it. So I don't even know how I got on that tangent, but we got there somehow. But yeah, it is definitely it's a big problem, that attachment to the victim state. And that's I understand how we got there now. That's why mindfulness is so important.
Yeah.
Because techniques like meditation and journaling actually start to rewire your brain, and they allow you to put some high level of awareness to what you're doing, right? Sam Harris, all-time favorite. Like, that guy is phenomenal when it comes to explaining the need for high level consciousness, right? And journaling, especially for women, journaling is beneficial because what I don't know about men, I can only talk about women, but what us gals like to do is we have these like neurotic stories in our brain. Like, we're like, this bitch did this, and then she's going to do that, and now I'm going to go there, and then right? And we like start to like catastrophize things that haven't even happened. Like, that's a girl thing, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
But when you journal and you put that story that's happening in your head pen to paper, you can actually tangibly look at that story and go, what the fuck?
Yeah.
Like, this is not the truth, right? And so that's where you start to create so much more awareness around your thoughts and around what you're telling yourself and how wrong it actually is, So yeah, mindfulness is a huge part of the health journey. And I would say it's arguably the number one reason why people don't heal.
It really is the foundation. It really is before any intervention. It's like you must encourage people to first develop that sense of awareness, because then how are you ever going to be able to understand the impact of any other intervention on top of it? It's like,
yeah, but the problem here is, right, so because obviously I'm in my final year of a psych degree, and for those of you who don't know, I also run an outpatient rehab program. So we work a lot with addicts and people with mental health issues. And here's the thing though, you cannot expect your brain to go to a higher state of consciousness or create more awareness or any of those sorts of things if it's biochemically unhealthy, right? So, it's like,
it's impossible.
It's impossible. It is impossible,
no matter
right?
how
And so,
you try, if
exactly.
you don't I get that.
So, and this is why, I mean, I don't know about you, but when I suggest meditation to people, there's a lot of resistance. And I suspect it's because they've tried it in the past when their actual brain was not healthy. And then they say, oh, it didn't work for me. Oh, it doesn't work for me, mindfulness. I'm not that type of person. It's like, well, yeah, but were you trying mindfulness when you were taking the contraceptive pill? Because we know that actually lowers your neurological capacity.
Yeah.
Were you trying meditation when you were vegan? Because we know that your amino acid profile was poo and your neurotransmitters were not functioning very well. So that, like, my point is, you can't have one without the other. You have to be integrating a good nutritional program, a good lifestyle program, and then alongside that, supporting that person's higher level of consciousness through things like meditation and journaling.
Yeah. It is what we do. It's the reason why we do what we do, because we understand the fact that it's a very holistic approach. And if we just addressed one component, there's no chance of healing. There's no chance of feeling better.
And that's sort of to the point that we spoke about earlier. That's where I struggle with, even within the wellness industry, because it's all about monotherapies.
Yeah.
It's like, just do meditation, just do this nutrition program, it's like, no, it's all of it. You have to integrate all of it. And I hate the word holistic because it's so bastardized, but that is at the actual crux of the word. Spiritual, physical, biochemical, emotional. You have to do all of it.
And that's obviously the key, well, the major drawback with your regular GP is that, like, do they even spend time they don't have the time. You just told us, 5 minutes, but they're missing so much. And then the fact that the first thing that they resort to is literally to mask the symptoms. How good are symptoms though? They literally are the best. They're the best thing ever. Like, it's the body's chance to actually signal that there's something either really severely out of balance or you are toxic in some way.
Yeah, 100%, man.
Mm.
And like, you know, I was talking to Lauren Curtin actually yesterday, and her and I were talking about one of her clients who didn't know that she had like stage 4 endometriosis until she randomly had I don't know, something happened, and this client just abruptly found out, right? But do you know, and like the most extreme version of this is cancers, but do you know how many red flags your body would have given you before getting that diagnosis?
It's before stage 4 endo.
Yeah.
Oh, she would have had.
And you've just ignored every single one of them. Or you've gone to your GP and you've band-aided it.
Yeah.
Like, bro, it's crazy.
Yeah.
And to your point, symptoms are so beneficial because they are our little prompter from the body saying, listen, you need to stop what you're doing and pay attention to me.
And be honest.
And then if you don't, I'm going to keep screaming.
And be honest with yourself and actually express that to the practitioners you work with, because we need to know that, because that's clues. Yeah. It helps
yeah.
a lot.
But I would say as well, though, a lot of people don't realize they're having symptoms
they don't even
initially. No, like I remember years ago, I had a client who actually got quite heated at me about telling her not to eat Wheat Bix for breakfast. And she literally used the excuse that they had a 5-star health rating. And I said, well, have you got digestive issues? She goes, no, I don't have digestive issues. I'm fine when I eat them. And then 20 minutes later, we're talking about something else. And she goes, oh yeah, I got hemorrhoids. I was like, that's a fucking digestive issue. But people are super disconnected, man.
Yeah.
So they don't even register that that's the same thing sometimes.
Or is it because they don't know, or they don't want to know, or they haven't been taught? Like, what is it, lack of knowledge, or what is it?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both. I think it's ignorance and lack of knowledge.
Ignorance is bliss.
Ignorance is bliss, man. Like, because once you know, you can't unknow. So you can challenge it, but you've still heard it. So I just think, yeah, it's a bit of an ignorance is bliss scenario. And then it's also, we're just not provided this information, whether it be, look at men's health, because it's relevant probably to this audience on this podcast. But like, do you guys get taught about your erections and your balls and stuff in high school? No.
Really?
Do women get taught?
One 3-hour class, but I missed that class.
Like, do women get taught about, the follicular phase and ovulation and the luteal phase and what? No, we don't get taught about that, So I just think it's systemic. It's from day dot that we get removed from our own bodies by the system, because it's all about this God complex. It's like, oh, we're not capable of healing ourselves. I have to seek out someone bigger and more authoritarian than me because they know my body better than me. What?
They know. How's that possible? Yeah, that's ridiculous.
Well, it's the story.
All right. Well, we'll pretty much. I think we'll start wrapping it up. We're definitely gonna have to.
We've ranted for long enough.
Yeah, we're definitely gonna have to do a follow-up episode in the near future. But yeah, I just want to say thanks for coming on today to give
my pleasure
and share what you've learned. So do you want to let my listeners know a little bit about like where they can find you, if they want to work with you, or things that you offer, your services, things like that?
Yeah, so you can find me at the Women's Series, both IG and .com. I basically, I just work with women. You can find me through a subscription model on my website, or you can do random consults with me. And I also run an outpatient rehab program called Connection-Based Living, which is a program facilitated by a guy called Jack Nagel, and he does the limiting belief aspect of addiction recovery, and I obviously do the holistic healthcare aspect. So if that's something that interests you or your family member, you can find us at Connection Based Living.
Awesome. We'll be having links to everything that Holly just mentioned in the show notes. So yeah, I just wanted to say
Thanks, Homie.
Thanks for coming on, Holly. And for everyone listening in, thank you for tuning in. Be sure to leave a 5-star review and a little comment, review, anything like that. Share the podcast, and I look forward.
Yes, share away.
I look forward to the next episode. Thank you.
See you guys.
Thank you everyone for joining in to today's episode. For in-depth show notes and lessons learned, visit nofilter.media/boost your biology.
This has been a No Filter Media production.
Say what you want.